Hello, and welcome to the Red Bank Humanists podcast. Each month, Red Bank Humanists hosts a public forum featuring speakers and topics covering a wide range of subjects of special interest to the humanist community. To learn more, including information about our monthly book club and our Drinking Post-Theologically events, visit redbankhumanists.org and follow us on Twitter at Red Bank Humanists.
This morning we have with us Dan Barker, who's about to speak with us. He's a prominent atheist who before becoming an atheist, served as a Christian preacher and musician for 19 years. But he left Christianity in 1984 and has been with us ever since. Dan and his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, are the current co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation out in Madison, Wisconsin. They do great work on both the legal side and also the publicity side for our cause. He's also a prolific author. He's written several books, including Losing Faith in Faith, Godless, and The Good Atheist. He's also written a children's book, which is available in the back, called Just Pretend, which I will snap up a copy of as soon as the program is over. He's also an accomplished musician. As I mentioned, he was a Christian musician prior to 1984, but he's recorded and published over 200 songs, and believe it or not, he is still collecting royalties from his Christian music as well. So Dan travels around the world giving lectures like he will today, performing at concerts and weddings, and debating theists across the land. He speaks fluent Spanish and is also a member of the Lenni Lenape tribe, which is the Native Americans who once were prevalent in the New Jersey area right here. And he's indeed also published a book of stories in that tradition told to him by his grandfather. So, a very, very well-rounded and accomplished member of our community. I'd like to welcome Dan Barker.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Ron, and Steve, and Adam, who's doing all the wonderful sound work over here. And Pat, where's Pat Barr, for setting up this meeting, for contacting me. And Trudy, I forget her last name.
Trudy Lagan.
Trudy for also working on this. It really does feel like a bit of a homecoming, not just to be at home with us like-minded radicals like you guys. But as Eric told you, my dad is a member, and my brothers and I, and we're members of the Lenape tribe. The government calls us the Delaware Indians because of the Delaware River, but the Lenape, which was in this whole area, we are a really smart tribe. I want you to know we're really smart. We're the people that sold Manhattan to the Dutch for $24. So my brother says, let's give the money back, and technically, that's our holy land. People say they have holy lands that their gods gave to them. Well, the Lenape tribe was there. The Moneta River was where the snake went underground and the hero fought, and there was holy places there. So don't we have the same right to go back to those settlers, those squatters that are sitting on our island over there and ask, hey, this God gave us this property. Now you get out of here. We want it. My brother Darrell said, let's just settle for the Trump Tower, something like that. It's never going to happen. But we had 7 migrations. If you study the history, we were the first tribe on this continent to have a written treaty with the colonists. That was the walking purchase. We were also the first tribe to have a treaty with the newly formed U.S. government. We have the distinction of being the first tribe to have a broken treaty with the U.S. government. And we were pushed 7 times. We almost went extinct. We were on a reservation in Kansas, and about 700 of them were forced, because of the railroad, to go down from Kansas to Oklahoma. My great grandmother was 5 years old when she marched down there with them. So we still exist. We're still a tribe. But we're in Bartlesville, Oklahoma now. Figure that out. We should be right here on this land, right? Right here. But that's the history of the human race, isn't it? All over the planet, that's been happening. And so my wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, is descended from the Mayflower. So sometimes people tell us, if you don't like America, go back where you came from. And I think, okay. And who could be more American than Annie Laurie? John Soule was her ancestor, who was, by the way, not a Puritan or a Pilgrim. He was just a deckhand. He was coming over for secular reasons, and Annie Laurie's grandmother was from that Soule family. So here we are. Who's more American than us? Well, America is a melting pot, and we're all true, full Americans. So sometimes the melting isn't as uniform as it should be all over, but it's good to see that non-believers, humanists, atheists, agnostics, secularists, in our group, Freedom from Religion Foundation, most of us call ourselves atheists, but there's some agnostics and some other deists, or even some liberal Jews and liberal Christians, and we say we don't care what we call ourselves. We all disbelieve in the same God, so that's doesn't matter. We work to keep religion and government separate, which is our main purpose. Our second purpose is to educate the public about the views of non-believers, which right now is the fastest growing, believe it or not, the fastest growing religion in the United States is non-religion. All the surveys, when people check, in 1990, about 7% of Americans picked no religion on the surveys. In 2001, it went up to 14%. The percentage doubled. Today, it's almost 20% of Americans who are checking non-religion. Some of those are believers. Some of them are spiritual. About half of them, you might say, are thoroughly atheist, agnostic, secular, humanist, total seculars. That's still a huge number, even if it's 9 or 10% of us. Compared to Jews, for example. Jews are a respected minority in this country at 1.2%. Non-believers are about 10 times that at least. So why shouldn't we be at the table as well? Why shouldn't politicians and the media consider our views as well when it comes time to consider important issues? Among young people, where's Brian? Is Brian here? And Sam is back here somewhere, over Brookdale. She invited me to talk at Brookdale, when was that? Friday night? Yeah, and that was fun. Among young people in college age, under 30 years old, it's about 30% who are non-religious right now, and that's huge. Some of you who are my age and older can appreciate that huge shift that's happened. 10, 15 years ago when I traveled, I could think of maybe 5 or 10 college groups on campuses that were secular, atheist, humanist skeptics. Today there are hundreds and hundreds of them just popping up all over the place. So something's happening. We get to witness it happen. Some corners being turned on this continent that apparently turned a long time ago in Europe, because look at the Europeans, how they've got these gorgeous empty churches over there, and most of the people are just totally blasé about religion. And I think that's starting to happen here. And isn't that nice? Aren't there better things to worry about than what your beliefs are, and better things to fight over than what your beliefs are? So we do it with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, based in Madison, Wisconsin, which began back in the 1970s. We do it through legal action, through lawsuits, through writing letters, through educating the public about the First Amendment. We also do it through educational things like books and newspaper and speeches and debates and music. So let me do a couple tunes, and then I'll talk about the Battle of Church and State. Did you know that the tango, the dance, was actually outlawed by the church? And you can see why. It came out of the bordellos of Argentina. Sensuous, tempting. And so the church said, do not dance. There were other dances, the turkey trot and other dances, and the tango, that the church said, this is sinful, you shouldn't do that. So of course, what did everybody want to dance? What a way to popularize a dance. If you're a young person in love, you want to dance the dance that the church doesn't want you to dance. But so anyway, Annie Laurie said, Dan, you need a song about dogma in a tango style. So here's what came out of that. has a bite. Beware of dogma. It wants a fight. Beware of dogma. It will ignite a holy war by itself. Beware of dogma. It'll trap your mind. Religious dogma. It'll make you blind. Beware of dogma. It's not designed to let you think for yourself. If we let it out in the universe, there will be no doubt everything is worse. Beware of dogma. Don't let it loose, that unchained dogma. It'll reproduce. Tie up your dogma. There's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Tie up your dogma. Don't let it loose. Beware of dogma. It'll reproduce. Tie up your dogma. There's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Please clean up after your dogma. Well, since there's a piano here, I'll do another tune. I read a lot of biographies and have discovered a whole bunch of popular composers and songwriters were non-believers. You would be surprised. Brahms's Lullaby. Verdi was an outspoken atheist. Berlioz and Ravel and Debussy and, of course, Prokofiev and Shostakovich and then the songwriters, the Gershwins, were non-believing Jewish family. Jerome Kern and Irving Berlin, who wrote God Bless America, didn't believe in God. And he admitted it was for a character in a musical. It wasn't his views. He did believe in money, though. He told his daughter that he hated Christmas, but he wrote White Christmas, which was like huge, you know. Yip Harburg, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Edward Elgar, when you graduate to Pomp and Circumstances. Think of all the music. Do a deer, a female deer. Richard Rodgers was an outspoken atheist. He told his daughter, if somebody gets sick, take him to the doctor. Don't pray for him. Do something, natural and real. Jay Gorney, and I read a biography of the composer who wrote Annie and Bye Bye Birdie. His name is Charles Strauss. And I thought, this is great. For his whole life, he's been an outspoken atheist, civil rights activist. He worked with Butterfly McQueen, and and he said, I never believed in God. I thought this was crazy. And he worked, with a lot of people and wrote these great musicals. He wrote the song, Those Were the Days, Those were the days, and he played the piano on that. So I called him up, and he's still alive. He's in his 80s. And we had him on our radio show, and he was so happy. There's more of you. This is great. I didn't know there was more of you. He lives in New York City. So we invited him to Connecticut to receive an award, and he came up with his wife, and he went up to the mic, and he said, I'm not one on speeches. Thanks for the award, but do you mind if I just play the piano and sing? And we said, do we mind? And he played Once Upon a Time, one of my favorite songs that he wrote. And he played, This Sun Will Come Up Tomorrow. But during dinner, we were eating, and Charles Strauss, they were doing a documentary about his life. So we're having dinner talking, and there's this microphone here between us, which is kind of weird. And he said, Dan, I've always felt this way, and I'm so glad to meet you people. I've never written a song about faith or belief or God or anything. If you send me some lyrics, I'll set them to music. And I said, okay. So it took me a long time to come up, because you don't want to just send any old stuff. I mean, you don't want to just send some. It took me about 6 months, and I finally sent him some words, and he said, I can use this. This is good. This will be a good song. But do you mind if I do some editing of the words? And I said, you're the pro. I mean, edit them. So he threw away about 2/3 of my words. He just cut them out. He says, now this is better. This is what a song should be. So do you want to hear the song? Yeah. It's called Poor Little Me. With a nod to Yip Harburg. You might get this. The multitudes mumble mythologies without end. But me, I have trouble with ologies that pretend to show what can't be shown, to know what can't be known. Lutherans have liturgies, Calvinists have creeds, Muslims have their minarets, Catholics have their beads, Methodists have methods, holy truth to ascertain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. Bishops transubstantiate, Shintos ring their bells, Transcendentalists meditate while Wiccans weave their spells. Hindus chant a mantra when they can't relieve the pain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. So fearful of the Netherland, believers band together. Unhappy with the weatherman, the Zuni's wave a feather. They dance in circles to demand, great spirits send some rain. But what do you do if you only have a brain? Quakers quake and Shakers shake, and Jews eat kosher food. Rastafarians wear their hair in pious gratitude. They all boast of miracles that no one can explain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. So fearful of the Netherland, believers band together. Unhappy with the weatherman, the Zuni's wave a feather. They dance in circles to demand, great spirits send some rain. But what do you do if you only have a brain? Quakers quake and Shakers shake, and Jews eat kosher food. Rastafarians wear their hair in pious gratitude. They all boast of miracles that no one can explain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. You know those pictures of the person that has an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other? You know, well, there's a piano sitting there, and so it's like, you know. Maybe I'll come back and we'll do like an evening concert with just music or something. Would that be a... So, the Freedom from Religion Foundation is fighting the battle of church and state, and I'll end with that song. I have a song called The Battle of Church and State that I'll end with. And we started in the 1970s. Annie Laurie Gaylor and her mother started in the 70s. Ann Gaylor and Annie Laurie are the co-founders. I'm a newcomer. I came in 1984, so I'm just a kid here. But they were active in women's issues back in the 60s. And the mother owned a newspaper. She wrote the first editorial in the state in favor of abortion rights in Wisconsin and got a lot of flack. She went to testify at hearings, and her young daughter, Annie Laurie, watched and went and learned, and right away, the daughter, Annie Laurie, even in middle school, the girls had to wear dresses to school. In frozen northern Wisconsin, they'd get to school and their legs were red like for the first two classes, and the boys didn't. So she and her friends went to the school and said, "This doesn't seem right," and she was an activist, and she got it changed. So the girls could wear pants to school, my goodness, keep them warm for school. She went with her mom and picketed and did all these protesting, and one day they went to, this was in the early 70s, they went to a city council meeting because Ann noticed that whenever she's fighting for women's rights, The major enemy, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, the major enemy was the church. It was always the priests and the preachers up there fighting women's rights. And so she went to testify at City County building at a meeting about this issue. And before the meeting started, a priest got up at City Hall and opened the whole meeting with a prayer. And Anne got up to give her remarks finally, and she said, I had something to say, but first I got to say, what's the priest doing up there, sitting up there with all you city county people? That doesn't seem right. The priest is the problem. The priest and his Bible are fighting women's rights, and that's what we're trying to go. And here he's up there cozy with the government, like they represent the government. That doesn't seem right. There shouldn't be prayer at my secular governmental meeting. It shouldn't be that way. Afterwards, a reporter came up to Anne and said, that was very interesting. What's your name, and what group are you with? And she said, oh, well, we're just some people in Madison that want freedom from religion, you know, in our personal lives and in the government. And he said, that's your group, freedom from religion? And she said, yeah. So he wrote a story in the newspaper about it. There's a group of freedom from religion people in Madison that are protesting the church and her phone started ringing. People calling up, how can I join that group? This is great. I've been wanting this thing myself. Why is the government and religion together all the time? And so how do I join? And so she says, well, I'll take your name. So she started typing up on index cards, you know. You remember typewriters? Yeah. And so they typed up a little thing. Well, I guess we have a group. So, and it grew and it grew and it grew and it caught attention because they were activists. They were complaining. They were out picketing. They were doing things. And people joined because they liked action. They liked something to be done. You know that old saying, after all is said and done, usually more is said than done. So she didn't care about, she just wanted to change. She just wanted to reform and to improve the world, especially for women's rights, but for, in general, the church fighting progress in so many ways. So a couple years later, the group got big enough and got noticed by other groups that it became national. 1978, Freedom from Religion Foundation became a national organization with just a few hundred people. And Annie Laurie Gaylor was a senior in high school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. The mother and the daughter worked together, and it was all volunteer. There was no income. It was just a local group, people. And Annie Laurie was ready to graduate with a journalism degree from the University of Wisconsin. And she noticed that they had scheduled a prayer for the graduation ceremony. And she thought, wait a minute. I'm the one who studied. I'm the one who did the homework. I'm the one who took the test. I'm the one who earned this degree. And they're going to be up there giving the credit to somebody else's God. Annie Laurie's a third-generation atheist and never went to church. And I mean, she did a couple times with her friends and thought it was boring, but she went, you know. And so she asked around, why is there a prayer at my graduation? That doesn't seem right. It's for me. It's for us. You know, we did the work. And they said, well, we've always done it that way. It's for over 100 years they've had prayer at the University of Wisconsin graduation, and that's a tradition. It solemnizes the occasion. You know, it's one of these things, you know, just, she said, well, I don't think it's right. So she said, who makes that decision? And they said, well, it's a student body organization that plans the students' graduation. So she went before the student body group, whatever it was called, and she said, why are we having a prayer at graduation? And they looked at each other, well, we've always done that, haven't we? We've always had a prayer. It's a part of what we do. And she said, do we have to? And they looked at each other, do we have to? I guess we don't, do we? So they didn't. They cut it out. They said, let's just not have a prayer. And actually, nobody noticed except a few right-wing religious people were really mad. And it hit the newspaper. University of Wisconsin stops 120-year tradition, whatever it was, a prayer. And actually, in the town where I live in Madison, that was pretty cool. It's like, yeah, we're making progress here. And so it hasn't come back. And all the other schools in the state followed suit. There hasn't been prayer at graduations ever since then, not because of a lawsuit, not because of any legal threat, just because of one person complaining. One person made a complaint and said, this doesn't seem right. And the power that you and I have as individuals, we don't need the high-priced attorneys to do it all the time. Of course, that helps when you have to. So the foundation started. It started growing. We started writing letters and started doing issues. We got the post office, one of the early complaints, the post office to stop putting religious cancellations on the stamps. By the way, the post office has been pretty good. If you complain to them, they've been very good about following state-church separation. So Anne and Annie Laurie noticed, and as the group kept growing, they finally rented a little office, hired a clerical person to work because the numbers were going. It really is the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that is protecting our rights as believers and non-believers. The separation of church and state comes from that. And the phrase wall of separation between church and state basically comes from Thomas Jefferson, who was basically kind of quoting earlier writers, but Thomas Jefferson was asked in 1802, he was asked in 1801 by Baptists, what does it mean? What does the First Amendment mean? And on January 1st, 1802, he wrote them a letter saying the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution erects a wall of separation between church and state. And that phrase, although it doesn't appear in the body, that phrase has come to represent what it actually means, a wall of separation, that the government must be neutral. And the reasoning for this is that the founders of our country saw that when you unite religion and government, you have problems. Most of the colonies had little theocracies, and it didn't work. They were excommunicating, they were excluding people, you couldn't vote if you didn't believe in the Trinity. There was all these fights going on, and the founders who met that in Pennsylvania to forge the Constitution didn't want any part of that earlier divisive history, and wisely wrote a constitution, a completely godless constitution, by the way. There's no God or Jesus or Christianity or religion in it except to exclude it. There shall be no religious test for public office, which was a big deal because in many of the colonies there was a religious test. Our founders didn't want any of that stuff. They thought freedom of conscience meant freedom of conscience, that we all think for ourselves. So even though Benjamin Franklin made a plea to to that conference, that the Constitutional Convention, he made a plea for prayer, he was ignored. It was not even voted upon, and they had no official prayer at the Constitutional Convention at all. Maybe some of the individuals privately prayed, because a lot of them were religious. Some of them were not. Jefferson and others were more deistic in their thinking, which they didn't believe in a personal God, but they thought the pre-Darwinian idea of some kind of a prime mover or the force or something. The deists thought that God was just nature, and when you read Jefferson's nature's God and the Creator, he doesn't talk about Jesus or Christianity or the God of the Bible. It was more of an impersonal thing. So they produced this Constitution, and then later the Bill of Rights, the very first amendment, says this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or, and the other four freedoms, you know what they are? Freedom of speech, press, assembly, and to petition the government, right? So collectively, those five freedoms are known as the freedoms of conscience. Our government doesn't grant those to us. The First Amendment is acknowledging those freedoms that we have. It's not like we go to our government and say, please, can you give us this freedom? The first time in history a constitution was written that was not underneath some authority. Before that time, and since that time, constitutions had to be underneath some sovereign, a monarch, a king, or a church, or a god, or some of the Scandinavian countries under the authority of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, for example, as if we need to have some stamp of approval from outside of ourselves to set up a government. The United States government, our Constitution, took it completely upside down and did this. And what are the first words of our Constitution? We're the authority. We, the people, are the authority. So there's no higher God or authority or monarch. We're a very rebellious country. We fought a proud Revolutionary War, kicking out the king, the monarch, the lord, the sovereign. We don't want that. We want we, the people, to be the sovereign ourselves. So those five freedoms that the First Amendment acknowledges, it doesn't grant them. And by the way, historians have just recently learned, they found an early draft, the draft of the Declaration of Independence that Jefferson was writing. On the word citizen, they noticed that he had written another word there, but then he had crossed it out, scratched it out, and he wrote the word citizen there in the Declaration. What do you think that original word was? They've since discovered, using the electron whatever thing to read underneath. Can you guess what that word was that he wrote first, and then he changed his mind and said, oops, that's the wrong word? Subject, yeah. In earlier constitutions, under a kingdom and a monarchy, we, the people, are subjects, right? But he saw that word and he said, wait a minute. This is a new country. This is a new way of doing things. He crossed out the word subject and he wrote in the word citizen. That says a lot, I think. So these 5 freedoms, including freedom of religion, which we all have, are given. But before those freedoms are given, first there's a phrase that's a non-freedom. Before the whole thing starts, before our freedoms are acknowledged, there's this non-freedom. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the freedom of. That word establishment is why we call it the Establishment Clause. Congress or the government, and by the 14th Amendment, that First Amendment applies to all the states, the entire government. The government cannot do anything respecting an establishment of religion, meaning it can't even lean towards. They didn't want anything to do with it. It didn't mean just simply that the government cannot establish a national church. It can't do anything respecting an established. The government, in other words, in order for us to have our freedoms, the government has to back off. The government has to be neutral. The government has to fold its arms and say, hey, none of my business. The government of the United States is limited. So when you're looking around at governmental actions that you wonder, is this constitutional or not? A really simple test to ask yourself is look at that dividing line between this non-freedom and these freedoms. We have freedom of religion in this country, but there's a difference between free speech and government speech. When we the people speak, we have freedom. We can say what we like. We can say what we want. That's America. When the government speaks, it doesn't. The government's hands are tied. The government is muzzled. The government as government may not take sides. You and I, we're free to disagree on religious issues. That's freedom of speech, freedom of conscience. One thing we are not free to do is ask the government to settle the argument. The government can't pick sides. The government can't say, oh, we're going to have this religion preferred, or can't hinder either. The government can't promote or hinder. That's what the Establishment Clause means. The government is neutral. So if you see a nativity scene at City Hall, is that constitutional or not? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Ask yourself, is that free speech or government speech? If City Hall has an area that is designated to be a public forum, where anybody in the public can get a permit to display something that's representing them and not the government, then that's free speech. In the rotunda at the Wisconsin Capitol right now, they call it the first floor, it's the second floor rotunda, that has been designated as a public forum. There's a nativity scene right there in the state capitol of Madison, Wisconsin. But there's a sign on it that this is from a local group, and anybody walking by that nativity scene knows that's not the government speaking, that's free speech, that's people speaking. We don't like it there. We don't think that nativity scene should be there in that location, but it's a public forum. You can't fight that. The only way to fight that is to ask for equal time. So guess what we've done? We have an anti-creche up there right now. And instead of the baby Jesus in a manger, it's a manger with a little black girl because the human race came out of Africa. And instead of an angel on top, there's an astronaut. Above us, only sky. And instead of the wise men, in that, there's Jefferson and there's Einstein and there's some real people, and with little quotes of theirs. And you can see it online if you want to find it. So it's just right across from the nativity scene. And in fact, which one do you think is more popular? The kids all want to run over and see the little doll. Oh, this is cute, and look at these people, and this is, we also have a sign up there, too, a winter solstice sign, recognizing that this season of the year is the winter solstice. It's not Christmas. We're happy to share it with Christians. They're in this country, too, and this is our natural human season. And if Christians and Jews want to do something this month, too, of course, it's a free country. So the point is that when people walk by our anti-creche, or our natural nativity, we call it, they don't think that's the government speaking. You wouldn't think it's the state of Wisconsin saying that. You think, oh, that's the Freedom from Religion Foundation getting a permit, like anyone else, expressing themselves. So sometimes we can't complain. Sometimes people call us and say, there's a nativity scene. Well, we need to know the facts. You need to know the context of it. Just a few months ago, we hired our 5th full-time attorney in our tiny little offices, which were expanding. When we moved in there in 1990, it was huge. I thought, wow, this is, in fact, I had the whole upstairs to myself. There's a sign over my office that says, the man upstairs. But but not anymore. We're so crowded, we're having to expand, and construction's already started, and we're going to quadruple our space. By next summer, they'll be finished with that, and our attorneys are going to have proper offices to do their work. They're not complaining. They love the work. Last year, more than 2,500 complaints came into our office from everywhere. Maybe some of you sent some in. All right? Did any of you see any problems that sent something in?
Pittman.
In where?
Pittman.
In Pittman?
I think it's a Keep Christ in Christmas.
Keep Christ?
Sign across the main street.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Put up by the Knights of Columbus.
Well, it depends now. So our attorneys will look at that. Sometimes you can't do anything.
You did.
But last year, our attorney sent out more than 1,000 letters, and a lot of those letters are victories. A superintendent of the school system in Hamilton County, Tennessee, for example, they were praying over the loudspeakers before all the football games, high school football games. One of our attorneys sent a letter saying, by the way, this is unconstitutional, this is wrong, you can't do this. And sometimes they say, oh yeah, we're going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court and fight it. And we have to point out, it's already been done. It's already been taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and you've already lost this. So the attorney for the school district informed the superintendent, you're going to lose this. You can't do this. This is wrong. They didn't know it. They just didn't know it. How come there's not constitutional police officers? If you're speeding on the highway, there's officers, right? But how come there's nobody? How come it's groups like ours that have to be the watchdogs and put out these fires? So the superintendent agreed with us and said, you know what, we can't, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this. You know, it actually kind of thanked us for informing them, sent out a memo to all the schools. We can't have prayers over the loudspeakers anymore before high school football games. There's non-believers, there's Jews, there's other people out there who are members of the community, and you know, people can pray privately if they want to. So do you think the community took that nicely? They stopped it, but at the very next Friday night, I think Hamilton County was playing Ray County. You know, Ray County was where the Scopes trial was. Most of the people in the stands before the game started rushed down to the 50-yard lines and all held hands and prayed out loud, screaming the Lord's Prayer. We'll show those atheists. We'll show them. They can't take prayer. And we're thinking, fine, that's your speech. That's not government speech. You're free to say what you like. We complained over a cross on a water tower, another Tennessee town, by the way. It happens mostly in the South, but anywhere in the country you find this. A big Christian cross on a water tower. And when we complained and actually sued and won that, the people in town said, oh yeah! So they all bought these white crosses and they stuck them in their front lawns. Almost every single house in that whole town, you'll see these white crosses. See, we'll show those atheists, they can't take Jesus out of our lives. And we're thinking, that's your speech. That's great. You know, put as many crosses as you like. This is America. When I walk home from work, I walk by a house that has a huge nativity scene in the front yard. And I applaud their freedom. I think it's really tacky. Have you ever seen a nativity scene that's not tacky? I mean, they're all like weird, you know. But that's their speech, that's their yard, those are their views, and I support that and I honor their freedom to express their views on their own property and their own time and their own dime. That's what separation of church and state means. So we, you know, I used to be a preacher, I can talk forever. So somebody needs to tell me when we're done here. At 11:30, is that right? Keep rolling, okay. So we love doing this because it's important, and we often, besides writing letters, we take lawsuits, and we've had more than 60 lawsuits since we started, and more than 50% of them were victories. Some of them that weren't victories were not on the merits, they were on standing, if you understand that. The court slammed the door on us when we sued President Bush over the faith-based initiative. The Supreme Court said, and one of the justices even said, that what George Bush was doing might be wrong to use money to set up these offices of faith-based initiative, but that we didn't have the standing to sue. So they shut the door on us suing and didn't even rule on whether it was right or wrong. Same thing happened with the National Day of Prayer when we sued Obama over, you know, all the presidents over the National Day of Prayer. The appeals court basically said, we're not going to decide if this is right or wrong. You just can't get into court. They shut the door on standing. You weren't injured enough. So it's been tougher the last 5 or 10 years to actually get into court and stay into court because of standing. So we've had to back off and reformulate. One of them is the housing allowance lawsuit. We have 3 lawsuits against the IRS right now. One of them is for politicking from the pulpit. One of them is for the 990 form that all nonprofits in the country have to fill out to be accountable, but churches don't. So we don't think that's fair. Why would they not want to be accountable? Why do we have to pay an accountant every year to fill out this big form that shows every penny we take and if you want to, you can go online and see, you can see my salary, you can see everything. It's open, it's all there, but churches don't have to do that. Why wouldn't they want to do that? Why are they hiding? And of course we know there's a lot that they're hiding. This church in North Carolina where the guy is building a 16,000 square foot home. And I don't know, it's $2 million or something, or 1.6 million. And he won't reveal what kind of housing allowance he's getting, right? So anyway, we're suing over the housing allowance as well. That's the third lawsuit, which is one that we just won. On November 22nd, the judge upheld our standing to sue, and I can explain that in a second, and also ruled on the merits that it's unconstitutional. What that is, the housing allowance is in the IRS code, section 107, there's 2 paragraphs there, that basically say that any minister of the gospel, and that's the phrase they use in the IRS code, the minister of the gospel does not have to include their housing or rent as income. Did you know that? Wouldn't you love when you're doing your taxes next year to say, oh, by the way, all my rent and housing expenses, that's not even income. It's not an exemption. It doesn't even show up on their forms. It's an exclusion. It's excluded from income as long as their church designates that part of your salary is being paid as a housing allowance. Then that housing allowance is like the church, we're just giving you a free place to live, basically. Some of any of these people that are buying a home getting that housing allowance can also deduct the interest on the loan and also the taxes. So they're double dipping. They're paying with tax-free money, but they're also deducting it. And then there's a lot of abuses going on. It came to our attention in the 90s when Rick Warren, you know who that is? The purpose-driven life. It's really more of a loophole-driven life. Rick Warren got his church to declare his entire salary a housing allowance. He paid no income tax. He reported no income. So at that time, his salary was like $90,000 a year. I don't think he was spending $90,000 a year on housing. I don't know about you, but and so that was actually tested in court, and he was going to lose it, except Congress stepped in and mooted it. But Congress specifically stepped in to save Rick Warren, and they refigured the law so that now the housing allowance is limited to the fair rental value of the home. You can't just pick any number you want. So, and by the way, he didn't have to pay back taxes, or he wasn't penalized either. He was let off the hook. So, but since then now, any minister of the gospel, including rabbis, including, you might not believe this, including cantors, because cantors do weddings and cantors do sacerdotal functions. They do, but people like Pat Robertson are ordaining his entire staff. The janitors are calling them ministers of the gospel. Basketball coaches at Catholic high schools are being considered ministers of the gospel. They're performing a ministry, right? So there's this huge loophole that hundreds of thousands of clergy in this country are taking to lower their tax liability, which means what to the rest of us? We're all paying. Ordinarily, you would think, and 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we could have gone into court as taxpayers to complain on this issue. And in fact, there have been successful cases under taxpayer standing. But the Hine decision in 2006 closed that and raised the bar for standing. We had actually filed in California under taxpayer standing saying that's not fair. So what we did, we pulled out of the California case after the Wynn decision and others came down, affirming that we weren't going to get even into court. And we refigured it. Churches are nonprofits, or 501c3 nonprofits. And the minister is hired by this church, and the church ordains, and then the church designates a housing allowance. When I was a minister of the gospel, I used to take that. I was working for a nonprofit, a 501c3 called a church, and I was promoting the concept of God. I used to get that tax break. Now that I'm working for another nonprofit, a 501c3, that's challenging the concept of God, I don't get it. So is the government playing favorites here? Is the government saying, in fact, when the bill was introduced in 1954, Representative Mack said, these ministers are caring for the spiritual welfare of America, and we need them to help us fight the common enemy, the godless enemy, which was what? Communism. It was presented to give us specifically to fight godlessness, which is me. So what we did, is we got the Freedom from Religion Foundation to designate for part of my salary and Annie Laurie's salary as co-presidents to be a housing allowance. It didn't change our salary at all, but part of it is designated as a housing allowance, fair rental value of the house that we live in. So these churches, these ministers have a housing allowance, I have a housing allowance, they get to claim it and I don't. There's the injury. It's not taxpayer injury, it's we working in a similar organization that are being discriminated against. And the judge affirmed our standing on that basis. And you'll never believe the argument that the government made. The argument's fighting us. The Obama administration is fighting us. They want to still give this break to preachers. I think politically maybe they feel like they have to. But you'll never guess what argument the U.S. government made. And by the way, if you're going to sue the IRS, if you're ever thinking about doing that, I got to warn you, you better have been very scrupulous with your taxes. When they deposed us, the U.S. attorney came in and deposed me and Annie Laurie for 2 whole days, the most boring 2 days of our lives. And she had a binder 2 or 3 inches thick just on me, past tax records and past forms, and she went back to 2008, and you claimed this, and you said that, and our attorneys were sitting there watching, and it was kind of embarrassing. I was like, but anyway, they didn't find any problems at all, except at the very end, she didn't find a problem, but it was cute. They asked, have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? So she's shutting it. I think we're done now, she said. She's shutting this big book, and I was so glad that was over with. And then she, kind of like a Columbo thing. Just one more thing. Were you ever arrested for drunk driving in the state of Missouri? No, I wasn't. But doesn't that tell you what lengths the government, what resources they have to investigate you and look at your life and to go through this whole thing? So anyway, the argument that the government used, you'll probably laugh like the judge did. The judge, you can see the judge laughing in the decision that she made on November 22nd. The U.S. government argued that Annie Laurie and I don't have standing to sue over the housing allowance because we don't know that we would not be considered ministers of the gospel too. Can you figure that out? That was their argument. Because the government doesn't decide who is or who isn't a minister, so it's conceivable that you could have an atheist minister. It's conceivable that the Freedom from Religion Foundation could be considered a religious organization. It's not. And that we are considered religious leaders in our community because actually I do issue de-baptismal certificates. And the government noticed that. That's for people who want to get out of their church. If you want to be de-baptized, you can have. They're free actually. If you want to go online and get them, and send one to your church. I am officially de-baptized. And on the de-baptismal service certificate, there's a quote by Robert Ingersoll: "With soap, baptism is a good thing." And so, surprisingly, if you read the decision from the federal judge, she quoted that. She said, "This was obviously a tongue-in-cheek thing, it's like an educational thing that I'm giving. It's not like any members of our group think I'm some sacerdotal person who's granting some official ordained, you know what I mean? Like there's clergy among us. There's no clergy among atheists and agnostics. We're just an organization." So the judge laughed that argument down and basically said that was silly. So we won that case, and it will probably be appealed. The government should appeal it. We'll probably go to the appeals court in Chicago again to go back. They're going to try to hit standing again and then go to the merits. But we're wondering, what could they say? The government's obviously taking sides here, and it's not right. And the judge in her decision said, equality is not hostility. The religious right, the preachers and the rabbis think that this is an attack against religion. We're trying to take something away from them. But when they complain like that, they're admitting that they have something valuable that we don't. So if you look online at the religious right, especially rabbis are really mad about the decision. One of them said, most synagogues are in wealthy parts of town, and the cost of having a home in this part of town is really prohibitive, and you're really going to hurt rabbis. And we're thinking, well then, ask for more money. If you want the rabbi, pay him, what they need to pay him for. And besides, is that the purpose of the rest of us taxpayers, to help the ones that are struggling? We're all struggling. We all have problems in our lives, and so why do they get this break and we don't? So I'm going to end there. There's a million more things I could do. I'll just end with a song. And do you want to do questions, or do you want to? Yeah. Oh, so let me end with a song, and then we'll see how much time we have left. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come a-tumbling down. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come a-tumbling down. I've heard about your hero Joshua, but his accomplishments are not so great, because there's none like Thomas Jefferson and the wall between church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come a-tumbling down. Some say that the wall between church and state is just a bad metaphor. But if unbelievers can't be protected from the rest, then what is the Bill of Rights for? We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall come a-tumbling down. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You recognize that? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come. Or the wall will come a-tumbling down. Is this fresh water? It is now.
That was terrific. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to do a little question and answer session here, and this is how it's going to go. Let me explain the rules first before you all start shouting out questions at the same time. Raise your hand. I'm going to walk around and kind of keep track of who's got questions. And I'll hand you the mic, and you can ask your question. And so this is like the talking mic. Only one person talks at a time. And I try and keep track of who has questions, so I get around. We're only going to have time maybe for 20 minutes for questions. So at the end, we're going to have to wrap it up, and I'll let you know when that is. And if we don't get to everyone, I'm sorry, but we just don't have the time. So who has a question? All right, you're the first person to raise your hand.
Hi. You mentioned the other lawsuit, which is against the Form 990. Have you joined the American Atheist lawsuit on the same subject with them?
We haven't. They're two separate. We might join them. So we work together with all the groups, and American Atheists and FFRF have been kind of ad hoc together on a lot of these. That particular case, we might actually have to join, but we do work together on the Friend of the Court briefs. And in fact, if this case is appealed, they're going to want to write a Friend of the Court brief for us, just as we wrote for Americans United. Americans United for Separation of Church and State is a wonderful group. And on this Greece, New York case, I think you know, we submitted a brief saying that the March decision should be overturned, that it's a bad law, that prayer is government speech, therefore the government can't pray. But I do know our attorneys are talking with each other. They all know each other. So, and sometimes it's good to have the same case brought 2 or 3 times, which then you can hit it. And sometimes the court decides to join them if they get close at the close to deciding at the same time.
In the ancient theater, there was the so-called Deus ex machina, the God that was coming out of the machine. Actually, when the plot was so involved, they would call in a God to resolve the whole issue. Now, my question is, does a state that truly separates religion and church invoke death through war or capital execution, thus solve the problem? This is my question.
If I understand you right, I think you might be saying that there's a parallel between a theocracy and a state control of violence, right? Because if the state has the authority to do violence, it takes it away from the rest of us. So,
Well, violence with death, and death is a metaphysical issue.
yeah. And the death penalty is a biblical concept, by the way. So you might argue that members of our organization, we're not a political group, so I think most of them are opposed to the death penalty, as I am. But we have pro-death penalty members of our group as well. It doesn't follow that if you're an atheist, you're necessarily a liberal. We have members of, there's a lot of atheists in the Republican Party who support gun control and who are anti-abortion, and it's, to me that seems weird, but that's freedom of conscience, right? So if what our group would say was, if a government action or law is based on any religious principle, if that's behind it, then we would complain about that and we would oppose that. If the government can make a secular argument for what they're doing, then we can't complain about that as our organization.
I love your lyrics, and I'm wondering, can we get them online, or how, are they available?
Yeah, they're available. The Poor Little Me song is on a CD in the back there.
Okay.
And I think Battle of Church and State is on one. Oh, there's 3 CDs. So see what's back there. But
And then just a quick, more personal question. For the time that you were a Christian minister, was there like an intuition or an inner voice inside that ever doubted what you were espousing?
not in the beginning, no. I was a true believer. Christians often tell me, Dan, you were not a true believer. You never would have left. And I make the case, if you read my book, Godless, I make the case, if I wasn't a true believer, then nobody is. If I wasn't a true Christian, because the Bible even says you shall know them by their fruits, not by what you think, right? So, no, not in the beginning years. But later, I went through this 4 or 5 year process that I explained, where there wasn't one aha moment. There was like 10,000 aha moments as I kind of gradually moved across that spectrum, less fundamentalist, more moderate, and finally more liberal. Finally, I found, hey, I dumped out all the bathwater and there's no baby there. There's just, it's all just one big figure of speech, and it was painful. I didn't want to do that. Some of you went through that process, right? If you were raised religious and you had to fight through it. And I really admire people like Annie Laurie and her dad. Annie Laurie's dad was like 8 or 9 years old, sitting in church in southern Missouri. And it dawned on him, he was sitting in church looking around and saying, my parents are nuts. Just as a kid, some of you were like that, right? As kids, I wasn't. I was the true believer. I thought my parents were wonderful. I thought that it took me into my 30s to finally get out. I admire those of you who, I don't know why, I guess it's a bell curve thing. Some of us are, more radical or skeptical than others by nature. And so it took me a long time to go through that and to struggle. And it finally, I guess you finally grow up, basically.
So I'm running for president, and Wolf Blitzer says to me, what religion are you? Are you a Christian? And I'm allowed to answer that question, which means that I'm admitting to a test, right? A religious test for political office. Shouldn't it be illegal for me to answer that question in any other way than say it's not constitutional to have a test?
You can answer the question. I don't know how politically smart that would be. The prohibition against a religious test for public office is a constitutional prohibition, which means that you can't be refused to be seated if you win the election, right? So we do know there are members of Congress who don't believe in God. There are members of state legislatures. Juan Mendez in Arizona, when it was his turn to give the invocation, to open the prayer, he got up and gave a secular humanist one. He said, don't bow your heads. I'm going to invoke you people in your life. And some of them were pretty mad. It was pretty brave what he did. I also know that Unitarianism makes a great cover. When you see somebody put down Unitarian as their religion, I'm religious. I go to church. So if Wolf were to ask you, do you believe in God, you have to decide. If you're, your political advisors, you could say, well, we all have different definitions of God, and then drop it, something like that. Over here.
I really don't have any questions. I just want to make a couple comments. First, on that business of your telling them that they're crazy. I would never tell my mother she was crazy, but my father I did many times. Right. And second is how much I appreciate and love your newspaper. I get that my plain wrap newspaper every month, and I think it's great. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Well, what's your favorite part? Is it the black collar crimes or the crank mail?
Mostly the crank.
The crank mail. We put up half a page every month of letters and emails we get from people that we don't correct their spelling. It would take too long
Before I ask my question, I wanted to thank you also because a few months ago, our police chief in Red Bank died from cancer. And at that time, the mayor sent an email with a lot of very religious phrases in it. Our chief is now in heaven and so on. And I did ask an advisor from Freedom from Religion Foundation, what did they think of this email and so on. And because it was a sensitive issue, I decided not to raise it with the mayor. But it was very helpful to get the comments from FFRF. So really, thank you for that.
Because you could have complained, but you decided not to.
Yeah, because of the the sensitivity of the issue, and it was really the mayor is a very religious person. So my question is, today there are tens of thousands of kids being homeschooled and being indoctrinated into religious belief. And I'm wondering if there's any possible legal wrangling that can be done to either minimize that, ideally to not have it happen, but is there any way to begin to make a dent in that kind of indoctrination?
Yeah, the solution to that is political and not legal. It's already been tested. Vouchers have already been tested and found to be constitutional. We disagree with the decision, but since it's parental choice, then vouchers are considered okay because the state's not picking, right? But it turns out that the state very well knows that 95% of these schools are religious schools. And in fact, there's public money there. A lot of these schools are popping up that didn't exist before because there's public money. Wisconsin's considering expanding its voucher program. Louisiana has a voucher program, and some of these schools are just, they put these kids in this living room of a home and they show them videos all day, creationist videos. And that's it. And they're getting state money to run a school, to school these kids. And the legislators who sponsored that bill don't think that's a problem. They think parents have the right. Parents own their kids and have the right to, which to me seems as counter-democratic, counter-melting pot, counter-America to make these little islands of people. But it turned out that in Louisiana, there's a couple of Muslim schools getting that money. And one of the sponsors of the bill said, we didn't think there were going to be Muslim schools. Well, the law of unintended consequences. She wanted it for Christian schools, good Christian families to teach and keep kids out of the evil secular world and keep them away from knowledge,
Hi, Dan. Are there any letters or sample letters on your site where we could individually take responsibility for things that we see in our community, like the crash that's at 1 Kings Road in Middletown on the police property? And, I'd like to be able to write a letter, but I don't want to be angry or anything. I just want to kind of point out what they're doing, and in the hopes of either maybe getting an atheist thing up or maybe having that removed.
Yes, the answer is yes. We have a lot of FAQs, and it's helpful to us if before you send the contact to our legal department, it's helpful if you've done as much homework as you can, because we don't want to go shooting from the hip. We want to know what's the policy here, what is the practice here, what is it privately owned or is it publicly owned, what is the, all of that stuff. And so our FAQs will guide you through what to know. And we also have a number of, well, most of our letters are available online that you can actually read. And we have template letters. So we have our 5 attorneys, but we also have interns, legal interns. And since these are template letters, the attorneys love giving the grunt work to the interns because they're just basically the same precedent, the same legal language, and then you're changing the name and that basically. So they can get a letter out really fast. They can't. The interns can't sign them, but they can get them out. So you can have those letters too and see what we've written to other. Sometimes it depends on what circuit you're in and what state you're in and what laws there are in the state that you happen to be in. The Plan B that you mentioned, which is to ask for equal time, is a great thing to do, but it requires local organizing and money to do that. Right now, there is a huge display in Daly Plaza in Chicago. Our chapter put up the big Dawkins A symbol, you see, that is lit up at night, plus another sign right there in Daly Plaza next to the nativity scene. And we were down there, and this is causing a lot of media stories about it. But that took somebody in town with the energy and the wherewithal and contacting the artist and somebody to build it and to raise the money to put it up. And we helped with the money. And with our chapters, they'll raise some of the money, but we'll pay for the rest of it. In Sacramento, right now, there are 55 billboards up all over the city of Sacramento because our chapter said, let's put some up about I can be good without God. And, this is basic. And the billboards are all different. It's a local person. It's like your face on a billboard by the highway with your own words on it. And then we have freedom from religion under it. We thought maybe a dozen of them would step forward and be brave enough. 55 did, and so we had to go to 2 different outdoor advertising companies to do this. So they're up now, and the media, this is just coincidental. The media is treating this like a war on Christmas. It had nothing to do, we were going to do it in October, what we got delayed, and it happened to hit during November, December. So they're saying, are you trying to throw a wet blanket on our celebrating of Jesus? And, but it got a lot of media, and there's a whole bunch of stories, the Fox News station and that. But that took local people with energy and time and talent and resources to do that. So you can, in fact, if you like, we do have some kind of half inexpensive banners that we can send to you, winter solstice banner, that if you don't have a lot of money, they're not that impressive. Some of them are almost sandwich board things. But I mean, we do have some banners that if you want and you can get permission and a permit to do it, we'll send it to you on loan, and you can put it in your city hall too. So.
Yeah, just like to make a quick suggestion. What an atheist friend of mine did, I think, is remarkable. He decided to put up his display, and he made a golden bull with a bunch of bodies around it, the human sacrifice and all this, to memorialize the holiday session, the true meaning of the Feast of Mithras.
Yeah.
And he put that in, I think it was somewhere in Freehold. And I think that's one way you can express yourself in a rather bizarre fashion. But if they're going to put their creches up, hey.
Yeah. Well, it's lighthearted and it's fun, and we try to strike a tone that's serious but not too, you don't want to look like some Yahoo group that's, you know what I mean? You want to find, because our views are respectable, right? Our opinions and our knowledge of that is, but sometimes to make a point you have to be a little funny and you have to say something that's, besides on a billboard there's not much room to say much, so you have to think of a pithy, kind of quick way to do it, or you'll cause some accidents on the highway.
I just wanted your thoughts on, in many European countries, they have, their percentage-wise, probably a lot more non-believers, but they don't seem, I don't know, concerned about this separation of church and state that you find in this country where we're often having these battles between, and I just wanted your thoughts on why this perhaps is, or...
Yeah, it's ironic because most of them have a state church, and yet the people are so totally non-religious now, And here we have complete separation of state and church on our Constitution, and yet the people, there's something weird about America. It used to be, there really is. It used to be America and Ireland, but Ireland is actually now catching up to the rest of Europe. If you think, Ireland is no longer exporting priests, they're importing priests. Ireland is embarrassed, and the younger generation is changing. Our country is still lagging. We're the one outlier, really, among developed nations that are so religious. It tends to be that the better off your country is, the less religious you become. In Denmark, one of the most successful countries in the world by any standard of health and well-being and income and equal rights, about 4% of the Danes say they believe in a God. 4%. About half of them call themselves cultural Christians. They'll get married in church, and it's a cultural thing, kind of like cultural Jews in America. They don't believe in God, but they still do the Passover. And what's the name? The Weinbergs, who took the case about prayer in Rhode Island. The dad said, "We're cultural Jews. For us, Passover means pass the food over." That's like. So I was talking in Australia. We went down to the World Atheism Conference in Australia, and I said, "You Australians are probably wondering what the heck's wrong with America. What's weird about?" Besides the fact that we won't want to switch to metric, which might say a lot, I said to these Australians, I think what happened was both of our countries were settled by rejects from England. You got the prisoners and we got the Puritans. And maybe that says a lot. We're still, you know what I mean? We're
very young.
Yeah.
So haven't fought these religious wars for centuries.
Yeah, so we have to start all over and fight them all over again. Well, anyway, that's what's keeping our group going. That's what's paying my salary, basically, is fighting this fight, the battle of church and state.
You mentioned your struggle, and I know your organization has set up a program to help other people, preachers who are leaving the faith and moving on. My question is, are you or anybody else helping other people who are leaving the faith? And what prompted this question is this summer I met a man who is trapped in a Mennonite community, which he has come to realize the Bible is basically fairy tales, and he's trapped and he doesn't know how to get out. Is there anybody that can help people in that situation?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple of groups. There's a group called Recovering from Religion, which is especially for that. The Clergy Project is for clergy only. And that was started in 2011, March of 2011. Daniel Dennett, the philosopher, Richard Dawkins, the scientist, their two colleagues, and myself, we started the Clergy Project, and we came up with about 50 priests and ministers who were ordained and who no longer believed. Most of them, like me, were out, although a few of them were still in the pulpit. Today, there's more than 500 in the Clergy Project. And you're welcome to go to the public site. It's actually a secret online forum where we have to protect the identity of these, mostly men. There's some women in the group, and a couple of ex-nuns too. But there's a public site called clergyproject.org where you can read about that, and including a couple of Mennonite clergy, former clergy who are now atheists. So if your friend wants resources, you can ask me and I can forward it on to them and say, do any of you want to talk with this? They both, in fact, both of them happen to be woodworkers. The Mennonites are real big on woodworking. This guy is too. Okay, interesting. A carpenter like Jesus. So, and besides books and that, and the American Humanists Association has resources on all that. And so online these days, it's not too hard to find somebody that can be plugged into. Or send me an email and I'll know at least where to ship it to. Try Recovery from Religion, or any of the other groups. You could probably find somebody who's gone through that very same path, and then that person won't feel so alone, because who knows exactly what, Mormons are like that, Mormons have a really deep hole to crawl out of, and that's ex-Mormons, that's all they talk about. If I come back again, I'll play you my Mormon song.
It's time for thank yous. Let's start with this gentleman. Yeah, look at that. Thank you for listening to the Red Bank Humanists podcast. For more information, visit redbankhumanists.org or follow us on Twitter @RedBankHumanists.